Hello and welcome to No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. India is truly in a bind. On one hand, it's a member of the Quad or alliance of democracies with the US, Japan and Russia, all of whom have taken a very tough line on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On the other hand, India has had a close time-tested relationship with Russia, which it depends on for military imports. For weeks now, India has avoided taking a stand that explicitly condemns Russia. It has abstained at the UN during votes against Moscow. But is it going to become increasingly difficult for New Delhi to keep up this balancing act? Today, President Biden called India's position on Russia shaky. A senior US official visiting India told NDTV that it was conveyed to New Delhi that democracies need to stand together against autocracies like Russia. Victoria Nuland is the US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, an old hand on Ukraine and Russia, and someone who's been a key driver of the sanctions against Putin and his government. I spoke to her earlier today as she concluded her visit to Delhi. Well, we're nearly a month into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and there is a flurry of diplomatic activity around the world, certainly here in Delhi, where one of the most senior officials of the US administration has been visiting for the last couple of days. US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, joins us on NDTV today. Thank you very much for joining us, ma'am. First, just to come straight to the point, President Biden has said overnight that India has been rather shaky in its position with regard to Russia and its invasion of Ukraine. It sounds like there's a bit of disquiet in Washington, D.C. about India's position.
Well, Nidhi, it's great to be with you. We had very deep and broad conversations about the whole U.S.-India relationship, including our Indo-Pacific strategy, what China is up to on this trip, but we spent quite a bit of time on the Ukraine crisis. And, India has made very generous humanitarian contributions to Ukraine. We were very pleased to see the Indian students leave. We had a conversation about the fact that unfortunately, despite months and months and months of effort by President Biden, by our allies and partners to try to solve this diplomatically before the war, President Putin instead decided to invade, and not simply to invade, but you see 4 weeks on how vicious and violent and inhumane this invasion has been. Maternity hospitals, apartment buildings, orphanages, schools, opera houses hit. And so I think in Washington and in capitals around the world, the sheer horror of this is really having a profound effect on how we understand President Putin's intentions and whether we ever could get back to the kind of stable and predictable relationship that President Biden had hoped to have with President Putin. And I think there's an evolution in thinking going on here in India as well, and we see an evolution in position. But that's why it's important for us to talk. It's important for us to talk at our level. It's important for us to talk at the ministerial level, which we will in the next couple of weeks. And it's important to keep talking at the head of state level.
Does the US, though, understand why India has taken the position that it has? It has abstained at different UN fora as well on this issue. Indian oil companies are also going ahead and buying discounted Russian oil. Is there an understanding about India's sort of strategic interests and its own interests that it's trying to look out for?
So we certainly know about the historic relationship and the defense relationship between first the Soviet Union and then Russia with India at a time when the U.S. was not prepared to have that kind of relationship. But times have changed now, right? They've changed in terms of U.S. and European willingness to be strong defense and security partner with India. We are doing more and more together in the Indo-Pacific, et cetera. But times have also changed in terms of the level of brutality and violation of international humanitarian law that we are seeing. So among the things that we talked about during these consultations were other opportunities for India to get what it needs, including Soviet-era equipment, potentially not from Russia itself. We have been supporting the sourcing of security needs for Ukraine, along with our allies and partners from around the world, including some Soviet-era equipment. And those are the kinds of things that we can do with India as it continues to evolve its position. But we also spoke about the importance of democracies standing together now at this moment when the autocracies like Russia, like China, are showing what a level of threat they can be to peace and security. And we're particularly concerned about Russia and China working together more intensively with regard to this conflict. Russia is seeking weapons from China. We have been very clear with China that if they moved in that direction and became co-combatants in this war, that would have consequences for our relationship. So this is what we've been talking about, is the fact that democracies now really need to stand together and evolve their position vis-a-vis Russia because of the choices Putin has made.
But, there are your other allies in Europe, for example, like France and Germany, who continue to buy, for example, oil from Russia. They haven't stopped energy imports from there. Even the SWIFT sanctions against Russia do have these loopholes where, when it comes to energy, Russia isn't really being punished for that quite just yet. So some would believe here that it's unfair to single India out on this. Why is there so much pressure on India regarding its position? Is it because it's the world's largest democracy and a partner in the Quad? Is that what it is?
So actually, with regard to energy, let me just correct the record here. We have, in fact, the amount of energy that India buys from Russia is relatively small. And we have made clear in our conversation that we understand that's not something that you can cut off immediately, in the same way that we've been clear with our European allies who are still too dependent on Russian energy, that we understand that they will have to evolve away from it as well. So when we made the decision in the US, in Canada, in Australia, a number of other countries, to completely cut off the import of Russian oil, we actually did not expect that from all of our democratic partners immediately because of the historic legacy. But what we do want to do is work together to find alternative sources over time. And that's what we hope to do with India, whether it's with regard to the security relationship, the energy relationship, etc., because Russia has proven itself to be unreliable and to be a violator of international law.
You have worked very closely on Russia and Ukraine for many years as a diplomat. You mentioned the Russia-China relationship. How much of a concern is it that China may actually, as some commentators are already speculating, use this as a sort of a springboard to attack Taiwan?
Well, China is obviously watching this situation very closely. It is watching what we have done in terms of international sanctions, in terms of the kind of penalties and costs that they might incur if they decided to move on Taiwan. But I hope that they are also watching how strongly the democratic world has stood together against this aggression and how quickly we have moved to respond. And they have to decide whether they want to face the kind of international isolation that Russia is facing now, whether that's good for their future. So we've been very, very clear with China, including in the President's conversation with Xi Jinping on Friday, that they need to say no to Putin's request for support in this war, and if they make another choice, that there will be consequences in our relationship.
All right, Victoria Newland, thank you very much for the time that you gave us today. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
So can India maintain this balancing act for much longer? Joining us on the program today is Mr. Shyam Saran, India's former Foreign Secretary. Mr. Saran, always wonderful to talk to you. What do you think about India's position on Russia from here on? The US seems to suggest that as this war keeps progressing and becomes more and more brutal, which it does seem to be, it'll be more and more difficult for India to keep abstaining.
I think the most important objective for India has been and will be to see an early end to this war, because the consequences for the people of Ukraine, I mean, there is no way that India can stand together with Russia on what it is doing in Ukraine. So I think there is perhaps a misunderstanding that India is somehow, by somewhat more nuanced reaction is being in support of Russia. I don't think that is true. India is very deeply concerned about what is happening in Ukraine. And it's not only the kind of violence that is being perpetrated there, but what the longer term consequences of this would be. Because the outcome of the war is one issue, but I think you have already seen that the world that we had known before this invasion took place, that world has actually changed dramatically, and India will be impacted. So it is a matter of great concern to India.
Mr. Saran, how do you look at President Biden's comments on India's position then on Russia being shaky? Do you sense that there is a sense of frustration in Washington over India's stand at the moment?
I think the United States of America is very clear about where India stands. Yes, there is an expectation that we should also, stand together with our partners in the West to condemn Russia. But you would have also seen from Victoria Nuland's statements to you that the United States of America recognizes that there has also been a certain evolution in India's position with regard to the war, as it has, in fact, escalated, and also that the relationship between India and, say, the Quad partners continues to be very, very strong. That is the message which also came out from the recent summit meeting between India and Australia. So I have not much concern on that score. If President Biden feels that there is some shakiness in India's position, I think India's position is evolving towards a much firmer position as time goes on. So I think he should not have any concerns on that score. So I don't think it is an issue of, where India stands. I think India's stand is very clear that here there has been a violation of a country's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and there is no way in which we can justify that.
Doesn't abstention essentially end up amounting to support in an environment like this? So does
no,
India, you think, if there's another vote at the UN, which may just happen, do you think India should take a very clear line rather than one where it abstains?
I think you have to take an overall perspective. One is the factor of the vote itself, but I think you should also look at what the representative of India said in his explanation of vote. I think if you look at the statement made by the Indian representative, it is very clear where we stand. So I don't think one should be so fixated on the just the vote on this issue. Also, please do not forget that we have had over the first 2 or 3 weeks of the war a major crisis with respect to a large number of Indian students who were stuck in the war zone. And therefore, we had to also make certain that we were able to, number one, keep engaged with all the major, players.
And of course, to ensure the safety of the students, which obviously was a right priority.
The first order of business, the first priority for us is the safety and security of our own citizens.
As you said, Mr. Saran, just now, that the world as we knew it has completely changed as a result of this Russian decision on Ukraine. Now, what are you particularly worried about? Is it the sort of growing proximity between Russia and China? How does that impact us at a time when we're facing aggression 2 years on our borders with China?
The problem at this point of time is that we simply do not know how things are going to, from now onwards, how will they unfold? Because, you have seen how dramatic things have happened. For me, for example, what has happened in Europe with the kind of unity which you see amongst the European countries who were in a very fractious state before, most dramatically what has happened in Germany. A left of the center coalition has taken a decision for a major, increase in defense expenditures, and actually Germany overturning something that has been a major principle right from the Second World War onwards, that it will not supply armaments or lethal weapons to conflict zones. All that has been overturned. Now, Germany is the largest economy in Europe. It will now become also the most powerful country militarily in Europe. That will bring about a change in the European situation. As far as China is concerned, I think China is, on the one hand, it can take the position that, if the United States of America, its peer competitor, is very much, sort of now focused on Europe, then it will be less focused on the Asian theater. Does that mean, therefore, that we will not see the same kind of U.S. Commitment to, say, the Quad or to the Indo-Pacific strategy as we have come to expect in the recent past? That could be one possibility. There can also be another possibility that Russia becomes so weakened by this war, it becomes even less of a power than it has been before, then maybe it is not even the kind of threat that it poses today. Maybe it will be much less as we go forward, which means maybe the US will therefore have more time to devote to Asia.
The
reason why I'm making this is that there are several scenarios which are possible, and I think one should not jump the gun and try to predict what is going to happen. But I would certainly say this, that as far as India is concerned, our relationship and partnership with the United States of America, with our Quad partners, will continue to be very, very important in dealing with what is really the main challenge for us, which is China. But even China is, sort of groping in a sense, trying to find out what the real impact of this is going to be. You saw, for example, that Wang Yi wants to come to India. The Chinese foreign minister, that he wants to really re-engage with India. That's a different kind of reaction.
I think that's right, because there is a sense that if things don't exactly go Russia's way in Ukraine, that China would also want to assess what risks it wants to take in this region.
So Russia, instead of being an asset, may become a liability for China.
Absolutely. Interesting. Mr. Saran, thank you very much for your perspective on that big story today. Let me go straight across to Suhasini Haider, National and Diplomatic Affairs Editor of The Hindu, and Sergei Strokin, journalist and columnist, joining us from Moscow today. Just to you first, Suhasini Haider, how should we be looking at this sort of the US on one hand kind of chastising India for its position in public with the US President's comments, and today at the moment silence from New Delhi so far on this?
Well, certainly, Nidhi, and I don't share Ambassador Saran's very sanguine view that the US and India are on the same page, because I think if you look on a broader perspective at the Quad Ministerial in Australia, then the Quad Virtual Summit, and now the meetings with the Japanese Prime Minister, the Australian Prime Minister, and even Ms. Newland's comments to you, where she said a substantial part of the conversation was about the Ukraine. I think what we are seeing is definitely that the Quad countries are not on the same page when it comes to Ukraine. The fact that the Japanese Prime Minister and the Australian Prime Minister made a point of, long paragraphs on Russia's actions and on condemning Russia's actions in Ukraine in their initial statements in the presence of Prime Minister Modi, and then Prime Minister Modi says nothing. The joint statement mentions Ukraine but doesn't mention Russia. I think there is definitely a difference in their positions. I think the fact that New Delhi has ensured that no statement from India has actually mentioned Russia or spoken about Russia in any kind of critical terms in this conflict itself means that there is a difference, that this is not a completely neutral position, and I don't think that is what New Delhi is trying to say with its abstentions and even with its explanation of vote.
Right.
So far, what we have seen is a very clear-cut Indian response saying that we are not going to criticize Russia. We will do what it takes for our own citizens, and we will do what it takes for our own interests when it comes to things like buying more oil from Russia or keeping up the military relationship or, in fact, abstaining.
Right. Sergei Strokin, just wanted your thoughts on what the U.S. Undersecretary of State was also saying in terms of Russia and its reliability today as a partner for India. I mean, she made it a point to specifically talk about that, whether it's on the defense front, whether, it's as an energy partner as well. And therefore, she was talking about how it was important to get allies like India to move to alternate sources of energy and even defense equipment. How do you see those comments in particular?
If we talk about Victoria Nuland, it's an open secret here that she played a sinister role in the events in Ukraine, which are dated back to 2014, when she visited Ukrainian Maidan and was calling for the opposition to revolt and to overthrow the legitimate government of ex-President Viktor Yanukovych. So it was Victoria Nuland and her colleagues who very much masterminded the unconstitutional revolt which took place in Ukraine 8 years ago and which drew Ukraine into present-day tragedy and mess. I'm also quite puzzled with the remark of President Biden, who said that India's position is somehow shaky. I would describe India's position not as a shaky, but as a rock solid, and this position is very much appreciated here in Russia. However, what is shaky is President Biden's stand, since it seems that he doesn't have an answer how to handle what is described here as Russia's special operation in Ukraine and is labeled by America and its allies as war.
Right.
Look, how can you call India's position shaky if we've seen in these days Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, then Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and then today Nuland, all are putting enormous pressure on India with zero effect. Can you call it shaky? So I don't know what's happening.
It is interesting that Russia sees that as clear support, which is exactly what I asked Mr. Saran as well just before this, that, when you abstain, it in a sense amounts to support. It's not really a neutral position, as it were. But Suhasini Haidar, just on another point, yesterday we had the Australian High Commissioner on the show. And, he was suggesting that India is playing an important role in talking to the leaders of both countries, of both Ukraine and Russia, and trying to see an end to this war, much like the rest of the world. Is there really a mediatory role that India could be playing here?
Well, certainly there is a role that India could play, given Prime Minister Modi's very close personal relationship with President Putin, President Putin's comfort level. He made an exception to visit New Delhi in December last year, when he was really visiting very few other capitals. But I don't think we have seen that kind of mediatory effort from New Delhi, at least overtly, in the last few weeks, since the last Indians came out of Ukraine. In fact, we haven't seen the government or Prime Minister Modi undertaking that kind of active diplomacy of the kind perhaps we've seen from the Israeli Prime Minister or the Turkish leadership that actually hosted the Ukrainian and the Russian foreign ministers together and are still part of whatever truce is being worked out right now. So yes, certainly India could play a role if it is to be a go-between between its US partners and President Putin, although probably those lines are still open and direct conversations can be had as well. And perhaps in terms of impressing on President Putin what the international community is beginning to feel about the actions in Russia. Certainly those daily pictures are very difficult to watch in this continuing war. But I don't think that we have seen that kind of position being taken by New Delhi so far.
All right, have to leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much, both Suhasini Haidar and Sergei Strokin, for joining us on the program tonight. That's it. Thanks for watching.